I never thought I would hear my own child use the word burden to describe me. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind where sunlight pours into the kitchen like a blessing, and the smell of freshly brewed tea feels like home. I was sitting at the small round table by the window, my knitting basket at my side, working on a scarf for my granddaughter's upcoming birthday. It was meant to be a surprise, soft, pale blue yarn that reminded me of the dress she wore the day she first called me Nana. I heard the slam of the front door and the sound of voices drifting in from the hallway. My son's voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the walls. My daughter-in-law's words carried a little higher, tinged with impatience. I could tell they were trying to keep their voices down, but the effort was failing. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when your life has been reduced to a small corner of someone else's home, your ears learn to pick up every shift in tone, every sigh, every whisper. You start to listen without wanting to because the words, their words, are always about you. She just sits there all day, my daughter-in-law said, her voice almost spitting the words out. We can't keep doing this. It's like having another child to take care of, except she's not a child. I froze, the knitting needles still in my hands, the half-finished scarf slipping onto my lap. My son's reply was quieter, but I heard it. I heard every single syllable. I know, I told you I'd talk to her. She's become a burden. A burden. It was not a word said in passing, it was deliberate. Spoken with the kind of resignation people use when they've made up their mind. The kind of word that sticks to your ribs like a stone you can't digest. I thought I knew what it felt like to lose something precious. I had lost my husband 5 years earlier to a sudden heart attack. I had lost the house we built together, because I couldn't keep up with the mortgage alone. I had lost friends who slowly drifted away, unsure of how to sit with my grief. But this, hearing my own son call me a burden, this was a different kind of loss. It was not the loss of a thing. It was the loss of belonging. When they walked into the kitchen a few moments later, I had composed my face into something neutral. My son kissed my cheek as if nothing had been said. My daughter-in-law poured herself a coffee and avoided my eyes. I knew they thought I hadn't heard. I knew they would keep thinking that as long as I kept pretending, but something in me shifted that afternoon. You see, I had not come to live with them because I wanted to. I had come because I had nowhere else to go. After my husband died, the bills kept piling up. My small pension could barely cover groceries and utilities. The house we'd built was sold to a stranger who didn't know the history in its walls, the echoes of laughter in its halls. My son had been the one to offer me a place. He had said it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That was 3 years ago. I cooked meals, I washed dishes, I took care of my granddaughter whenever they needed me. I kept to my room most of the time, careful not to interfere. I tried to be small, to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, and still, I had become a burden. The scarf in my lap blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I didn't let them fall, not yet. I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my granddaughter's laughter drifting from upstairs. That laughter was the only thing that made staying bearable. But the thing about hearing, the truth, the real truth, is that you cannot unhear it. It plants itself deep in your chest and grows roots, choking the air out of you, until you can barely breathe. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the years I had spent raising my son, the nights I had stayed up when he was sick, the sacrifices I had made so he could go to college, the way I had worked double shifts to make sure he never went without. I thought about the pride I had felt when he called me after buying his first home, telling me I had taught him everything about hard work. I thought about how he used to look at me as if I were the safest place in the world. Now, I was something to be endured. By morning, my decision had begun to take shape, though I didn't yet know the details. All I knew was that I could not keep living like this. I could not keep swallowing words that tasted of shame. I could not keep pretending that their home was still mine in any way. The next week passed quietly on the surface, but inside me there was a storm gathering. I began taking mental notes, what I would need to pack, where I might go, how much money I had left in my savings. I didn't tell a soul. I smiled when I was spoken to. I made dinner on Tuesday like I always did. I took my granddaughter to the park on Thursday. I stayed invisible, because invisible people can slip away without anyone noticing until they are already gone. One evening, I overheard my son on the phone with a friend. It's been hard having her here. I mean, I love her, But he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to, that was the last straw. I decided I would leave without a word, no long explanations. No tearful goodbyes that might give them the chance to convince me to stay out of guilt. Just me, a suitcase, and the road ahead, and for the first time in years, the thought of being alone felt less frightening than staying. I woke up before dawn, my room still shrouded in darkness. The air heavy with the weight of my decision, the silence felt unnatural, almost like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to take that first irreversible step. I lay there for a moment, staring at the faint outline of the curtains. Listening to the ticking of the old wall clock, I could hear my own breathing, shallow but steady, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt an odd kind of clarity. It had been 3 weeks since the day they told me I was a burden. 3 weeks since I sat in the kitchen, tea in my hands, listening to my son and daughter-in-law tell me how they thought it would be best if I stayed out of their way. I had replayed that scene every night since, wondering if I had misunderstood, wondering if maybe they had not meant it the way it sounded, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They meant exactly what they said. I was no longer welcome in their lives unless I could fit neatly into their schedule and their convenience. I had cried for 2 days straight, not because they had hurt me, though they had, but because I finally understood that I had no place in their future. My usefulness had expired the day I stopped providing free childcare, free cooking, and free emotional support. Without those things, I was simply taking up space. That was the last straw, and now, here I was, about to disappear from their lives completely. I slid out of bed quietly, my knees aching the way they always did in the mornings. My suitcase was already packed. Tucked away in the corner of the room, it wasn't much, just enough clothes, my passport, the savings I had quietly collected over the years, and a few photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind. I touched the top of the suitcase for a moment, feeling the worn leather beneath my fingertips, and then I pulled it upright. The sound of the wheels rolling across the wooden floor seemed deafening in the stillness. I moved slowly through the house, not wanting to wake anyone. The place felt cold in more ways than one. I glanced into the living room, where the sofa was still covered in the throw blanket I had wear upon years ago. I had made it during one of the winters when my son was still a boy, sick with the flu. He had clung to that blanket for warmth, and I had felt proud knowing I could comfort him. Now it was just another forgotten piece of fabric in a house that no longer felt like mine. In the kitchen, I left a short letter on the counter. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a plea. It simply said, "I am leaving. Do not look for me. Live your lives as you wish. I will live mine." I placed my wedding ring on top of the note. My husband had given it to me nearly 40 years ago, and though I had worn it through every trial of our marriage, it now felt like a symbol of the life I was letting go. By the time I stepped outside, the first traces of morning light were bleeding into the sky. The air was cool and damp, and I could smell the faint scent of rain on the wind. I had arranged for a taxi to meet me 2 streets away, so I walked quietly through the neighborhood, pulling my coat tighter around me. Every step away from that house felt like a step out of a cage. The taxi driver was a kind man, older, with silver hair and a warm smile. He didn't ask questions when he loaded my suitcase into the trunk. "Airport?" he asked simply, and I nodded as the car pulled away. I watched the streets I had walked for years blur into a gray haze. The grocery store where I used to shop, the park bench where I had once read to my son, the church where my husband and I had renewed our vows, they all passed by in silence, becoming part of a chapter one would never open again. At the airport, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had bought my ticket a week ago, a one-way flight to a small coastal town far from here. It was not somewhere I had ever been before, but the pictures I had seen showed a quiet place, full of fishing boats, narrow streets, and people who might not know my name. That was exactly what I wanted, anonymity. The boarding process was a blur. My hands trembled slightly as I handed over my passport, but no one noticed. By the time I found my seat, I felt the exhaustion of the last few weeks finally pressing down on me. The plane lifted off the ground, and I stared out the window as the city grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing but a patchwork of gray and green beneath the clouds. I thought about what my son would say when he found the note. Maybe he would be angry, maybe he would shrug and move on. I doubted he would cry. As for my daughter-in-law, I imagined she would feel relief. I had taken away the inconvenience she had complained about so many times. In a way, I was giving them what they wanted. By the time we landed, it was late afternoon. The air smelled different, salty, fresh, alive. I stepped out of the small airport and felt the sun on my face. Warm but not harsh. There were gulls circling overhead. And the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of someone else's judgment pressing against my chest. I found a small inn on the edge of town. A place with peeling paint and flower boxes in the windows. The woman at the front desk was friendly, offering me a room with a view of the ocean. That night, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the water. I thought about everything I had left behind. The voices, the arguments, the unspoken resentments, and I realized I felt lighter. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I would ever speak to my son again, or if I even wanted to, but I knew one thing for certain. I was free. And freedom, after all these years, felt like the sweetest thing in the world. When I stepped off the bus into that small, coastal town, the air felt different, almost as if the wind was trying to peel away the weight I had been carrying for years. The salty scent mixed with the faint aroma of fish from the docks, and the cries of gulls felt like a strange welcome. I had no one waiting for me, no plan, just a bag with my clothes, a small tin of jewelry I had managed to keep hidden from my family, and the faint but stubborn determination that I would never go back. I walked slowly along the uneven cobblestone path toward a weathered cafe that looked out over the harbor. Its windows were fogged, and a chalkboard outside listed the daily soup and coffee prices in shaky handwriting. Inside, it was warm, and the scent of freshly baked bread wrapped around me like a blanket. A woman behind the counter looked up, her hair streaked with silver and tied back with a bright scarf. She smiled, not the polite, tight-lipped smile I had been used to, but something genuine that reached her eyes. "First time here?" she asked, her voice deep and warm. "Yes," I replied, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I just got into town." "Then you're in luck," she said, sliding a steaming mug toward me. "First coffees on the house for newcomers." It was such a small kindness, but it nearly undid me. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my fingers. No one here knew my name. No one knew the years of being called a burden, the cutting remarks from my own children, the way I had been made to feel like an unwanted guest in my own life. Here, I could be anyone. I could start fresh. After finishing my coffee, I asked the woman, her name was Lorna, if she knew of any place to stay. She pointed me toward a small boarding house a few streets away. The building was old, with peeling paint and a porch swing that groaned under the wind. The landlady, a round woman with bright eyes named Millie, offered me a room on the top floor, for a price I could just barely manage. That first night, as I lay in the small bed listening to the distant crash of waves, I realized I had not heard silence like this in years. No bickering, no passive-aggressive remarks, no footsteps pacing the hall in irritation, just the sound of the sea and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. It was frightening and freeing all at once. The next morning, I went back to the cafe and asked Lorna if she needed help. She hesitated, then smiled. "It's not much pay, but I could use someone to bus tables and wash dishes." I agreed immediately. My hands, which had been used to cooking, cleaning, and caring for people who resented me for it, now worked for someone who appreciated every effort. I began to find comfort in the routine: wiping tables, stacking chairs, watching the regulars, who came in each morning for their coffee and gossip. One afternoon, an older man named Joseph came in, dressed in a heavy fisherman's sweater. He noticed I was new and asked me where I was from. I hesitated, not ready to share the truth, and simply said, "From far away." He nodded as though he understood more than I had said and told me that the sea had a way of healing people, if they let it. In the evenings, after my shift, I would walk along the pier. The water reflected the last light of the sun in shimmering ripples, and the wind carried the scent of salt and the promise of storms. I began to feel my chest loosen, as though each day was gently unwinding the tight knot that had been there for years. I saved what little I could from my wages, and after a month, I bought a small journal from the town's general store. In it, I began to write not just about my days, but about the life I had left behind. The good moments, the cruel words, the moments I wished I could erase. It was as if by writing them down, I could set them down and not have to carry them Everywhere I went, some nights were harder than others. There were times when the loneliness would press in, and I would wonder if I had made a mistake. I would imagine my children sitting together, perhaps mentioning my absence with a shrug, perhaps not at all. I would remind myself that I had not been wanted, that my leaving had not been a loss to them, at least not one they would admit. But then the morning would come, and I would wake to the sound of gulls and the distant hum of fishing boats heading out to sea. I would make my bed, braid my hair, and walk to the cafe, where Lorna would greet me with a smile and a steaming mug of coffee. Slowly, almost without noticing, I began to feel lighter. One rainy afternoon, Joseph stopped by the cafe and left a wrapped package for me. Inside was a hand-knit scarf in deep shades of blue and green. There was a small note, "The sea heals, let it." I wore that scarf every day after, not just for the warmth, but for the reminder that kindness still existed in the world. By the end of 3 months, I no longer thought of the town as a place I had run to. It had become a place I belonged to. The locals began to know my name, and I theirs. I found joy in small things: a perfect loaf of bread coming out of the oven, the way the harbor glowed under the moon, the warmth of shared laughter at the cafe. I was no longer the woman who had been told she was nothing without others. I was someone who could stand on her own, even in the face of everything I had lost. I had built a new life, piece by piece, and I was beginning to see that perhaps leaving had been the first step toward finding the person I was meant to be all along. When I left my old life behind, I thought I had buried it deep enough that no one would ever unearth it. The new home I had built for myself was tucked away in a quiet coastal town where strangers minded their own business, where the waves seemed to wash away the memories I could not bear to keep. But the past, I learned, is stubborn. It waits in the shadows, biding its time, until it decides you have gotten too comfortable. That day began like any other. The salty air slipped through the open kitchen window as I brewed my morning tea. I had started to enjoy slow mornings, ones that were not rushed or filled with someone else's demands. I would sit at my small wooden table, sip the tea, and listen to the distant call of seagulls. It was a life that felt simple, safe, and mine. The knock at the door was soft but firm, the kind that makes you freeze before you answer. For a moment, I thought it was Mrs. Calder from next door, dropping off the fresh bread she often baked, but something about the rhythm of the knock was unfamiliar. My chest tightened and my hand hesitated on the handle. When I opened it, I saw a man in his late 40s, wearing a neat suit that seemed out of place in our little town. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes scanned me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his tone polite but probing. "That's not my name," I said automatically, though my voice wavered slightly. He offered a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, my mistake. But I believe you're the person I'm looking for." I felt the air grow heavier. "And who might that be?" "Margaret," he said softly. "Your family has been trying to reach you for years." The mug in my hand felt slippery. I set it down on the side table before I could drop it. I studied him carefully, trying to decide if this was a trick, or if my past had truly crawled this far to find me. "You have the wrong person," I told him. "Do I?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a faded photograph. My breath caught. It was of me, younger, standing in our old garden, my arm wrapped around my granddaughter, Lily. She couldn't have been more than 4 in that picture. The day had been sunny, and my smile then had been genuine. Seeing it now felt like looking at a stranger. "I am not here to cause trouble," he continued. "Your son wants to talk to you. He says things have changed." I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Changed? The same son who had looked me in the eye and told me I was a burden. The same one who had made sure I knew there was no place for me in his home, in his life. "I don't care what he says," I replied. My voice was steadier now, sharpened by years of silence. "He lost the right to talk to me when he told me I was nothing." The man hesitated, as if weighing whether to push further. "He says he regrets it, that he was going through a hard time, that he misses you." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The sea breeze tangled my hair as I met his gaze. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be told by your own child that you are a waste of space, that your very presence is a burden to them?" Regret does not erase those words. He seemed to falter then. "I am just the messenger. I was hired to find you." "Well, you found me," I said. "And now you can tell him I am fine, more than fine. Tell him I built a life without him, Without the constant reminder that I am unwanted, his expression softened. Are you sure you don't want to at least hear him out? I shook my head. If he wanted to talk, he should have done it before I packed my bags and left without a word. Before I spent nights in small motels, unsure where I would end up. Before I stood in the middle of a strange town and decided that I would never let him or anyone else decide my worth again. We stood there for a moment, the waves crashing faintly in the distance. He finally nodded, tucking the photograph back into his case. I will tell him, he said. As he walked away, I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. I had thought that if the past ever tried to find me, I would crumble. That hearing my son's name again would undo me, but instead, I felt something unexpected, strength, not the shaky, defiant kind I had in the beginning, but a deep, steady certainty that I had made the right choice. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the pier watching the fishing boats bob gently in the water. The sun was warm on my face, and the breeze carried the scent of the ocean. I realized then that the past could knock all it wanted, but it could no longer come inside. I had locked that door for good, yet as I turned to head home, I couldn't shake one thought. If my son was trying this hard to find me, it meant he would not give up easily, and I knew that sooner or later, the quiet life I had built might be tested again. I was in the middle of watering my small balcony garden when I saw the notification pop up on my phone. It was a name I had not seen in months, my neighbor from the old town. For a moment, I debated whether to open it. My hands trembled slightly, water dripping from the pot into the soil. Eventually, curiosity won. The message was short. Almost too short to carry the weight it held. They're getting married today. The words hit me in the chest like a blunt blow. My breath caught, my knees felt weak, and I had to steady myself against the railing. They could only mean my son and the woman I had never met but had heard about from whispers, half-truths, and the occasional hostile comment from relatives who still spoke to me. My neighbor, bless her heart, sent another message before I could reply. I thought you should know, I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, numb. I should have expected it. After all, I had been erased from their lives months ago, labeled a burden, discarded as though my existence was an inconvenience. But knowing they were moving on without me building a life I would have no part in was something else entirely. It was not just about missing a wedding. It was about missing an entire chapter of my family story. I set the watering can down and sank into the chair by the window. My heart was racing. 1,000 memories of my son as a boy came flooding in. His laughter when we baked cookies together, the way he clung to my hand on the first day of school, the tearful promises that he would always take care of me when I was old. Now he was standing somewhere, probably smiling, maybe holding someone else's hand in place of mine. Someone else would pin the boutonniere to his jacket. Someone else would be in the family photographs. I thought about calling. I even picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over his number for a long moment before I locked the screen and set it aside. If they had wanted me there, they would have told me. If they had cared to hear my voice, they would have reached out. Still, a part of me burned with questions. Did they speak about me at all today? Was I mentioned in passing? Or was my name erased entirely? Did my absence bring them relief or shame? The balcony felt suddenly too small, too quiet. I decided to take a walk, needing the air to cool the rising heat in my chest. The streets of this new town were peaceful, with little shops lining the sidewalks, but no matter how far I walked, I could not escape the image forming in my mind. My son in a suit, the woman in a gown, guests clapping as they kissed. I could almost hear the music, smell the flowers, feel the energy of a celebration I was never meant to attend. When I passed a bakery, the smell of fresh bread and sugar pulled me in. I bought a single slice of cake, though I was not hungry. Sitting by the window, I cut into it slowly, my fork trembling. This was my wedding day too, in a strange, twisted way. A day where I was giving away my son not to a bride, but to a life where I no longer existed. The other patrons chatted happily around me, their laughter a sharp contrast to the heaviness in my chest. I overheard a group of women at the next table discussing a wedding they had attended recently. How beautiful the bride looked, how emotional the father's speech had been, how proud the mother was. My throat tightened, and I looked away. I finished the cake without tasting it. Outside, the late afternoon sun was dipping lower, casting golden light on the streets. I walked home slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached My apartment. I sat at the small desk and opened my journal. The words poured out before I could stop them. Today, my son got married. I wasn't there. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. But I hope despite everything that he's happy. I hope he knows I love him, even if he's decided I'm not part of his life. I put down the pen and closed my eyes, letting the silence wrap around me. I imagined the wedding ending, the guests leaving, the couple starting their new life together somewhere. He might be thinking about me even for just a moment, and maybe, someday, he would realize what he had lost. But tonight, I would light a candle, pour myself a cup of tea, and let the hurt settle where it needed to. I would not call. I would not beg. I would let the absence speak for itself. The candle flickered on my table, the only light in the room. I whispered to it as though it could carry my words to him. Be well, my son, be well. Even without me, and in the stillness of that small apartment, I decided I would carry on with my life, no matter how much it hurt to be left out of his, because my story was not over yet, even if I was no longer part of his. The rain had been steady all morning, tapping softly against the windows of my little cottage like a persistent visitor I refused to let in. I had woken up before sunrise, not because I wanted to, but because my mind was heavy with thoughts that would not allow me rest. Something inside me whispered that it was time to speak, not to their faces, but in words they could not interrupt, twist, or diminish. I made tea and sat at my wooden kitchen table. The kettle's steam curled upward and disappeared into the air, just like the years I had given them. My pen lay on the table beside an untouched notebook. For a while, I stared at it, wondering if I even had the strength to go through with this. But I did. I had to. I opened the notebook to the first clean page. The paper smelled faintly of cedar. Something comforting, something pure. I began to write. And the first words came from the deepest part of me to my family or whatever is left of it. I paused. My hand trembled slightly. The truth of that sentence cut me as sharply as it would cut them. I continued. When you told me I was a burden, you did not just push me away. You pushed away years of sacrifice. Nights without sleep. Days when I went hungry so you could eat. You erased my love as though it had been nothing more than a shadow in your life. Do you remember the times I sat beside your sick beds? Do you remember the winters I worked extra hours just to make sure you had warm clothes? I do. I remember it all, even when you pretend not to. Tears blurred the ink, but I let them fall. This letter was not meant to be neat. It was meant to be raw. You said I slowed you down, that my needs were too much, but the truth is, my needs were never the problem. Your patience was. Your gratitude was, and I realized that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. I became a chore, a task on your endless list, something to be checked off and avoided whenever possible. I am writing to tell you I no longer accept that role. I have removed myself from it entirely. I set down my pen for a moment. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming harder against the roof. It was almost as if the world was lending me its strength, urging me to pour everything out before my resolve weakened. You do not know where I am, and I will not tell you, not because I want to punish you, but because I need peace. Peace you never allowed me when I was under your roof. Peace that you stole from me with your careless words and your louder silences. You may tell yourselves that I abandoned you. But I did not abandon. I escaped. I took a sip of my tea, now cold, and set the mug back down. My hands no longer trembled. Instead, there was a strange calm filling me, like a tide slowly pulling in. You will never understand the weight of leaving without a word until someone does it to you. And maybe they will. Life has a way of returning lessons we refuse to learn, but by then, it will be too late to reach for me. By then, I will be far beyond the grasp of your apologies. I kept writing, the words flowing now without hesitation. Do not mistake this letter for bitterness. It is not, it is clarity. It is the final act of someone who has given everything and decided she will give no more. I hope you read this and feel something, not guilt perhaps, but reflection. Think of who I was before you decided I was inconvenient. Think of the love I offered without conditions, and then ask yourself why you let it go. I signed it simply, from the one you called a burden, when I put down the pen. I stared at the letter for a long moment. It was not perfect, but it was true, and truth, I realized, was all I had left to give them. I slid the letter into an envelope and sealed it. My heart pounded as I wrote their address on the front. Not because I feared what they would think, but because I knew that once It left my hands. It would be the final thread cut between us. By afternoon, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. I put on my coat, stepped outside, and began walking toward the post office. The air smelled of wet earth, and my boots sank slightly into the softened ground. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet strangely freeing. When I reached the post office, I stood for a moment in front of the drop slot. My fingers gripped the envelope tightly. Memories flooded my mind: birthdays, school events, quiet evenings on the couch, then the arguments. The cold stares, the words that cut deeper than they knew. I let the envelope fall. It made the faintest sound as it landed among the others, swallowed by the darkness inside the box. Walking home, I felt no triumph, only a deep and steady quiet. I had not written the letter to hurt them. I had written it to finally, truly let go. That night, I lit a fire in the small hearth and sat by it, feeling the warmth on my skin. Somewhere far away, they would open my letter. Somewhere far away, they would read the truth I had carried for too long. And whether they understood it or not, my life had moved on. I was sitting on the porch of my small cottage, a mug of tea, warming my hands as the late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon. The air smelled faintly of salt from the ocean just beyond the hill, and I could hear gulls calling somewhere in the distance. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that feels like a blanket wrapped around your shoulders, protecting you from the chill of the world. I had not thought much about them in weeks. The family I had left behind had become like a dream I had once had, so vivid at the time, but now fading around the edges. Sometimes I would remember a detail sharply: my daughter's laughter when she was little, the way my son's hair would stick up after he woke from a nap. But those moments came and went. Soft as the tide, the sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the stillness. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. Few people ever came out this far unless they were lost or delivering something, and I wasn't expecting either. My heart gave a strange lurch. A small silver sedan pulled into the clearing beside my porch. The driver's door opened slowly, almost reluctantly, and when I saw who stepped out, my breath caught in my throat. It was Daniel, my son. He looked older than I remembered, and thinner, too. His eyes darted around nervously before settling on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was so heavy it felt like it could crush us both. "Hi, Mom," he said finally, his voice low. I stared at him, searching for any sign of the boy I used to know. "Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He shifted from one foot to the other. "Can I talk to you?" I set my mug down slowly. "That depends. About what?" He looked down at the ground, the way he used to when he was caught in a lie as a child. "About everything." I should have sent him away. After all, it had been their choice to cut me out, to tell me I was a burden. I had worked hard to build this new life, one where I did not depend on scraps of kindness from people who thought they were doing me a favor by tolerating my existence. But something in his face, something fragile and uncertain, made me stand up. "All right," I said, "you can come in." Inside, the cottage smelled of lavender and lemon polish. I led him into the small living room, where he sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. I took the armchair across from him. For a while he said nothing, just rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. Then, finally, he looked up. "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air between us, almost unbelievable. "I should have stood up for you," he continued. When everyone said you were too much trouble, I didn't defend you. I told myself I was protecting my own family, but the truth is, I was a coward. I didn't want to deal with the conflict. I didn't want to be the one to push back. So I let them push you away instead. I folded my hands in my lap, my nails pressing into my palms. "You didn't just let them," I said quietly. "You joined them." He flinched. "I know, I said things I shouldn't have said. I convinced myself they were true because it was easier than admitting I was wrong." I looked at him, trying to see if he truly meant it. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse, but guilt alone was not enough to undo years of damage. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you here today, after all this time?" His shoulders sagged. "I saw a picture, someone posted it on Facebook, of you at the market in town. You were smiling, holding a basket of flowers. You looked happy, happier than I'd ever seen you in the last few years I knew you." It made me realize I wasn't part of that happiness, and I hated that. I hated that I had become someone you were better off without. A part of me wanted to tell him that yes, I had been happier without him, without the constant judgment and dismissals, but another part, the part that still remembered the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, wanted to believe there was still something worth saving. What do you want from me, Daniel? I asked. He hesitated. I want you to forgive me. The room seemed to grow smaller. Forgiveness was not a gift to be given lightly. It was something that cost the giver dearly. Something that could not be rushed or demanded. I don't know if I can, I said at last. Not today. Today. He nodded slowly, as though he had expected that answer. I understand. I needed to tell you I was wrong, even if you never speak to me again. I needed you to know I'm sorry. We sat there for a long moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, I stood. It's getting late, I said. You should head back before it's dark. He rose, looking like he wanted to say more. But instead he just gave me a small nod and walked to the door. I followed him out onto the porch. When he reached the car, he turned back. You look good, Mom, he said. I'm glad you're doing well. I didn't answer. I just watched as he got into the car and drove away, the sound of gravel fading until all I could hear again was the ocean and the gulls. I sat back down with my tea, now cold, and stared at the horizon. I didn't know if this was the start of something new or just a momentary ripple in the calm I had built, but for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe not today, not tomorrow, but someday, there could be more than silence between us. When you spend years building a life away from the people who hurt you, you start to believe that distance will shield you from the pull of the past. For the most part it does, but there are moments, rare and sudden, when the past knocks at your door, not with a gentle tap, but with a pounding so loud that you cannot ignore it. That was exactly what happened on the morning I received a letter I hadn't expected, delivered by hand, with my name scrawled in the familiar writing I thought I'd never see again. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the soft sunlight of early morning streaming across the wood, illuminating the steam from my tea. My little garden outside was in full bloom, rows of marigolds, lavender, and snapdragons swaying in the gentle breeze. It was a peaceful day, the kind that reminded me why I had chosen this quiet town to rebuild my life. That peace shattered when I saw a young courier walking up my front path with an envelope in his hand. He smiled politely, asked me to sign, and left without another word. I turned the envelope over in my hands, my heart tightening when I recognized the handwriting. It was my daughter's. My fingers trembled as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever words she had decided to send after all these years. The letter began formally, almost as if it were addressed to a stranger. She wrote that she had heard where I was living from someone I used to know in our old neighborhood. She said there had been a lot of changes in the family. She mentioned her brother, her own children, grandchildren I had never met, and then she wrote the one sentence that made me put the letter down and step away from the table. We need you. Those 3 words carried more weight than she could have imagined. I needed to read them again to be sure I wasn't imagining them. After years of silence, rejection, and abandonment, they had suddenly decided they needed me. She didn't elaborate in that paragraph, but I read on. Apparently, her brother, my son, was getting married again after a divorce. The wedding was coming up in a few weeks. They wanted me to be there. Not only be there, they wanted me to walk my son down the aisle. I stared at the letter, letting the words sink in. My mind raced with memories of the last time I saw my son, his cold stare, his words that cut deep, how he had told me, without hesitation, that I was a burden, how they had pushed me away, making me feel unwanted in my own family, and now, years later, they wanted me to stand proudly by his side in front of an audience of people I didn't know, pretending everything had been fine all along. I sat in my kitchen for hours, reading and rereading the letter. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have dropped everything, put aside her hurt, and gone running back at the first sign they wanted her. That woman had been willing to shrink herself to fit into their idea of what she should be. That woman was gone. The new woman, the one who had built her own life, who had learned the value of her own company, wasn't going to say yes so easily. That night, I walked through my small house, touching the things I had chosen for myself over the years. The books I had bought because I wanted them, not because someone else approved. The quilt draped over my armchair, sewn by the neighbor who had become a true friend. The photographs of my garden in every season, not a single forced smile or staged family portrait among them. My home was mine in every way. The thought of stepping back into their world made my chest feel heavy. Still, I didn't throw the letter away. I placed it in a drawer by my bed, and for the next several days, it sat there like a stone I could feel pressing against my thoughts. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to ignore it until the wedding had come and gone, but another part of me, when I had tried to quiet, was curious. Why now? Why me? Why after all this time? On the fourth night after receiving the letter, I dreamed about my son in the dream. He was a little boy again, holding my hand as we crossed the street. He was laughing, and I was laughing too. But then the scene shifted, and suddenly, he was the grown man I remembered from the day we parted, cold, dismissive, walking away without looking back. I woke up with tears on my pillow and a strange clarity in my mind. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was my turn to decide, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because I had the power to choose what was right for me. The next morning, I sat down at my desk with a clean sheet of paper and began to write my response. I told my daughter I had received her letter. I told her I was glad to hear that life had changed for them, that there were new beginnings and reasons to celebrate. But I also told her the truth, that walking my son down the aisle after all these years would feel dishonest, both to me and to everyone watching. I wrote that I wasn't the same person they had known before. I had built a life that had nothing to do with the roles they had assigned to me, and while I didn't wish them any harm, I wouldn't step back into their story as if the years of hurt had never happened. When I finished, I read the letter over. It was firm, but not cruel, honest, but not bitter. It was the kind of letter that came from someone who had finally learned her own worth. I signed my name, folded it, and placed it in an envelope. As I walked to the post office, the morning air was cool against my face. With each step, I felt lighter. I was no longer waiting for their approval, nor was I weighed down by the hope of reconciliation on their terms. My decision was mine alone, and that was enough. As I dropped the envelope into the mailbox, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being left behind this time. I was the one walking away on my own terms. When I finally agreed to meet them, it was not out of sudden forgiveness or softened feelings. It was out of curiosity. The kind of curiosity that gnaws at you at night and whispers questions into your ear until you cannot fall asleep. I had received a second letter, this one in my son's handwriting. His tone was different, no arrogance, no demands, just a request. He wanted to see me. He claimed it was important. Part of me was skeptical. I remembered too well the last time I gave into their pleas. It ended with accusations, shame, and a heavy heart. But the other part of me wondered what could possibly be so urgent that he would write himself rather than have someone else do it. After weeks of ignoring it, I decided I would go. Not to reconcile, not to pretend the years of hurt never happened, but to see what they wanted so badly from the woman they once called a burden. I arrived at the small cafe early. It was a quiet place on the edge of town, somewhere I would have chosen myself for a conversation that could turn messy. The windows were streaked with the gentle blur of rain, and the low hum of voices made the air feel less tense. I sat in the corner, my back against the wall, where I could see the door. I had no intention of being taken by surprise. They arrived together, my son and my daughter. It struck me how they both looked older. Age has a way of leaving its fingerprints on everyone. My daughter's hair had streaks of silver, and my son's face carried deep lines that were not there the last time I saw him. They both paused when they saw me, like they were checking if this was real, if I was truly there. My daughter spoke first. Mom, thank you for coming. Her voice was soft, but I could sense the nerves underneath. I nodded, my hands wrapped tightly around my cup of tea. You asked me here. Say what you need to say. My son cleared his throat and leaned forward. We need your help. The words felt strange coming from him. This was the same man who once told me I was nothing without Dad, who laughed when I tried to offer advice, who shut the door on me more times than I can count. Help with what? I asked. He glanced at his sister before answering. It's about the house. The one you used to live in. The one Dad left behind. I kept my expression still, though inside memories flickered. Our old home, the laughter that once filled it, and the bitterness that followed after my husband's funeral. What about it? My daughter took over. It's in trouble. There are debts, repairs, and we might lose it. We thought maybe you could step in. You still have the savings from selling your cottage, right? There it was, the reason they suddenly remembered my name. The urgency in their letters was not love. It was desperation for my money. I let the silence hang. I wanted them to feel its weight. "You're asking me to give you my savings," I said slowly, "after the way you treated me. After you told me I was a burden, after you made it clear you wanted no part of me in your lives." My son's jaw tightened. "We were wrong, Mom. We were angry, grieving. We didn't mean everything we said." "That's not true," I replied sharply. "You meant it at the time, and it was enough to push me out of your lives for years. I built a new life without you. Why should I give up the security I fought for?" My daughter's eyes glistened. "Because it's still your home. It's where we grew up. It's part of our family." Family, I repeated the word slowly, letting it settle between us. Family is not just blood. Family is how you treat people when they have nothing to give you. You had the chance to treat me as family, and you chose to throw me away. They both looked down. The sound of rain against the glass was the only noise between us for a long moment. Finally, I spoke again. "If I help you, it will be under one condition, and it's not negotiable." Their heads lifted instantly, eyes locked on mine. "What is it?" my son asked. "You will not get the house," I said. "If I put my money into it, it becomes mine legally. I will decide what happens to it. And I will decide who lives in it. You will have no claim." My son's face flushed with shock. "You can't just take our home from us." "I can," I said firmly. "It's not yours. It hasn't been yours since you let it fall into this state, and if I am the one saving it, I will not pour my life's work into a place only for you to push me out of it again." My daughter's voice was trembling. "So you're saying we'd have to live there on your terms?" "Yes," I said. "You would live there as my guests, respectfully. Or you find another way to save it." My son opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand. "No, you've had enough of the last word over me. This time, it's mine." The tension was thick, but I did not look away. I had been small in their eyes for too long. I had begged for their approval, their kindness, their acknowledgement. Now they were the ones asking, and I wanted them to understand the weight of it. My daughter finally nodded slowly. "We'll think about it." "Do that," I said, standing up. "But no. My condition is not just about the house. It's about how you treat me from now on. If you go back to the way you used to be, I will walk away again, and this time you will not find me." I left the cafe without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air was crisp. I felt the strange mix of power and sorrow. Power because for the first time in years, I had control. Sorrow because it had come to this family reduced to negotiations and conditions. As I walked away, I realized something. The condition I had given them was not only for their benefit. It was for mine. I needed to know that I could stand up for myself, that I could draw a line and hold it, even when my heart ached. If they agreed, maybe we could start again, slowly, with boundaries this time. If they refused, then at least I would know I had not bent myself out of shape for people who could not see my worth. Either way, I had already decided one thing. I would never again let them treat me as a burden, not in my home, not in my life. I stood at the edge of the driveway, my suitcase in one hand, my other hand clutching the strap of my bag. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the front yard of the house I once called home. Everything looked the same, yet I could feel the weight of the years that had passed between this place and me. The roses Dad planted were still in bloom. The same wooden bench sat under the maple tree. But my heart told me this was not the home I had left. Not exactly. The truth was, this visit was not about reclaiming anything. It was about standing in the very place where they had once told me I was a burden, and showing them that I had rebuilt myself without their pity, their approval, or their terms. I was here on mine. I rang the doorbell, and for a moment, I wondered if they would even open it. Then I heard footsteps. The door swung open, and there stood my sister-in-law. The one who had whispered behind my back years ago about how unmanageable I was becoming. She froze. Her eyes flicked to my suitcase, then back to my face, as though she was calculating whether I had come to move back in or to deliver a reckoning. "Hello, Claire," I said evenly. She blinked, then managed a tight smile. "You're here?" "Yes," I replied, stepping past her into the hallway. "On my terms." Her smile faltered. I could see her wanting to ask what I meant, but she didn't have to wait long. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my bag, a copy of the letter I had sent them months ago, the one that outlined exactly what I would and would not accept if I were to have any relationship with them again. From the kitchen, I heard movement. My brother emerged first, then my niece, then my mother. My mother looked older, frailer, yet her eyes still carried the same judgment that had once made me shrink into myself. The difference was, I no longer shrank. "You got my letter," I said, meeting her eyes. She nodded slowly, as if unsure whether to speak. We read it, every word." "Good, then you know I'm not here to beg for a place. I have a home, I have a life. I'm not coming back to be taken care of, pitied, or managed. I came because I decided it was time to face you all as the woman I became without you." My brother shifted uncomfortably. "We made mistakes," he muttered. I let the silence stretch until it was thick between us. "Mistakes," I said, "are when you forget a birthday or miss a call. What you did was deliberate. You made me believe I was worth less than the air I breathed. I carried that with me for years, until I decided I didn't need your permission to exist." My niece's eyes were wide, darting between us like she was witnessing something she'd never seen before. Her family being told the truth without fear. "I built a life far from here," I continued. "I found people who saw value in me, without conditions. People who didn't measure my worth by how much I could do for them. And I came back not to be accepted, but to tell you that I don't need your acceptance anymore." Claire crossed her arms. "Then why come at all?" "Because this house," I said, turning slowly, "was the last place I allowed myself to be diminished. I needed to stand here and say that you will never have that power over me again." My mother's eyes glistened, though I could not tell if it was from guilt or anger. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. "But you did," I replied. "And the hurt doesn't vanish because you didn't intend it. What matters is whether you learn from it, and whether you stop doing it to anyone else in this family." For a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet was heavy, but it was not suffocating me the way it used to. This time, I was the one in control of the air in the room. I set my suitcase down by the door. "I'm not staying. I booked a hotel nearby. I'm in town for a few days. And if any of you want to talk, you'll come to me, not because I'm holding the power, but because that's the boundary I'm setting for my own well-being." My brother nodded slowly, almost in relief. My niece stepped forward and hugged me, whispering, "I'm glad you came back, even if it's just like this." I held her close. "I'm glad too. Because now you know, you can walk away and still be whole." When I stepped outside again, the air felt lighter. I didn't need their apologies to heal. I didn't need their embrace to feel loved. I had come home, but only to prove that I could leave again without breaking. This time, it was on my terms. People think coming home is about crossing a doorstep. It is not. It is about deciding which parts of yourself you will bring with you, and which you will leave buried in the place where you learned your deepest pain. When I stood there, years after I had walked away, I realized I had been carrying two women inside me all along. The one they had dismissed, overlooked, and broken, and the one I had built in quiet corners of my new life. The first woman had once begged for a seat at their table. She had swallowed tears in dim kitchens and learned to measure her worth through the crumbs of attention they allowed her. She had believed, foolishly, that family love was unconditional. The second woman, the one I had fought to become, knew better. She knew love without respect was poison, and she had learned to feed herself joy from her own hands. She had learned that peace is not something someone gives you. It is something you take back when you realize you have been giving it away. I came back not because I wanted their forgiveness, but because I no longer needed it. My life was no longer a hollow waiting room for their approval. I had filled it with the warmth of friends who became my family, laughter that belonged only to me, and mornings where I woke without the weight of someone else's disappointment. When they looked at me that day, they saw someone unrecognizable. My son's eyes, once so quick to judge, flickered with uncertainty. My daughter's voice wavered as if she were speaking to a stranger. In many ways, I was. They had lost the version of me they could control, and in her place stood a woman who owed them nothing. Some wounds never close neatly, some betrayals never vanish, but I learned that healing does not mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting it consume you. It means seeing the truth so clearly that no one can make you doubt it again. I walked away again that day, but this time my footsteps did not echo with loneliness. I was not leaving home. I was carrying my home with me, in my heart, in my choices, in the life I had built from the rubble of the one they tried to destroy. They called me a burden once. Now I carry only myself, and I have never felt lighter. As I reached the end of the driveway, the wind shifted. carrying with it the faint smell of the lilacs that used to bloom by my kitchen window. For a moment I thought about the years I had lost, the birthdays missed, the empty chairs where love should have been, but then in the quiet between heartbeats, I felt something stronger, the unshakable truth that I had chosen myself. And in doing so I had finally come home.